Hi and welcome back to PDA Dad UK. In this episode I'm going to be looking at Pica and what it is, how it affects our kids and what can be done about it and what steps should be taken once it's been identified. As I say, welcome back to PDA Dad UK. Before we do go on, I'm going to do the usual. Please go hit like, hit subscribe and ring the bell. I'm really trying to get the subscriber numbers up to about 10,000. That would be an amazing thing. So if you can help and you can go down now and hit like, hit subscribe, ring the bell. Not only that, you'll always know when new content's coming up and useful information. It also makes a big difference to who gets to see this due to YouTube's algorithms. So, Pica. Now, Pica is one of the things that we don't actually have to deal with too much in this home. It's not something that affects my family, but it's something that affects a lot of families, and it's something I thought would be really good to look into. I've had a lot of questions come in about it, a lot of people wanting to know more about it, and there's not a lot of understanding about it. So we're going to look at what Pica is. We're going to look at how we can identify it, what steps to take once we've identified it, and how we can support our kids in this. So what is Pica? Well, Pica is a compulsive eating disorder. And what I mean by that is basically it's where kids, adults as well, will eat and consume things that aren't edible. So things that they shouldn't be eating, things that aren't necessarily going to help them. In fact, that things that can cause sickness and illness and issues with the body. But they eat them and it's a compulsive thing. Now, Pica is actually a really common thing. We all kids go through at some stage in that sense of they'll stick things in their mouth. And that's all entirely typical, and that happens with all kids, and it's something that's part of our sensory development, I guess, and learning things. And what happens is you feel really sick and you go, oh, I'm not touching that again, and we move on. The problem is that for kids with Pica or people with Pica is that it becomes compulsive, and regardless of the effects it has, and no matter how sick they feel, how much it makes them feel bad, they will continue to try and consume it. And it can be all sorts of things. It can be flaking paint, it can be bits of wood, gravel, sand, dirt, you name it, anything that's going in the mouth. If it's compulsive, that's where we really need to take a good look at it. And as I say, this is something that people go through at different stages of life. It's more common in kids, and it's just something that people tend to grow out of with time. However, a pregnant woman will all be able to identify with the cravings you get during pregnancy and the unusual things that some people will eat during pregnancy. And that can be, anything from, I know people who've eaten chalk. There's the famous pickles, ice cream and gravy. I don't know. Big shout out to Tigger. I know you love that. But it's that thing. It's different people will consume different things. And it's usually because there's a low of some sort and your body identifies you need it. So, it could be zinc, it could be calcium and stuff like that. And the body just finds ways to intake it. Those cravings are just a part of pregnancy. But obviously you're not going to sit there eating leaded paint. That would be a real issue. And that's the problem that we get when we click into kids dealing with Pica, is that they can't identify what damage it's doing to their body. Now, Pica is something that really is more commonly associated when you have kids who might have learning disabilities or may have conditions like autism that really do affect them. And so I think it really sort of keys into that sensory processing side of things. It's a need for something and it clicks over. But it's so much more complicated than that, and it does need to be addressed if you're seeing it in your kids. So Pica can cause many issues when it comes to the digestive system and how kids are feeling and what they're experiencing internally, and it can make a big difference to moods and stuff like that, because obviously if your body isn't well, if you're not coping well, if you're not feeling good, you tend to be more grumpy, you tend to be lower, and that can affect things, all sorts of things like meltdowns and coping and everything that comes in that we've discussed so many times in this channel. Things like, as I say, meltdowns, but just things like general mood, the ability to cope. It might increase sensory issues, it may increase the anxiety basically, and so therefore everything becomes that much more complicated to deal with. So there are certain symptoms that you need to look at that will click in, and it really depends on what the kid's eating. So what they're consuming is going to affect different ways. But things to look out for are things like consistent stomach upsets and stomach pain. Now, this is obviously as the body's digesting indigestible foods basically, and it's dealing with stuff, and it has to somehow sort this out. It creates a pain. And for, you know, a neurotypical person like myself, your body, your brain communicate, and you go, oh, that was a bad thing to eat. I'm not going to touch that again. However, that doesn't necessarily get through on the basis of, you know, when someone's autistic and the brain just works differently, it may not communicate that in the traditional way back to the senses. And so pica is something that becomes, as I say, compulsive, and they will eat more and more. Blood in your stool is a big thing to watch out for. Obviously, if you're consuming things that are going to cause internal damage, it's going to cause bleeding. So gravel is probably a good example, and there are examples of kids who will do this, and people will eat gravel and it goes through the system. And obviously, the gravel's sharp, it's going to have edges to it. As we digest it, it's going to cause cuts and lesions as it goes through. And that's obviously going to relate to blood in the stool. So if you're seeing that, it's a big warning. It can be a big warning sign for many things. So if you do ever see blood in anything, poo-wise, basically, make sure you are getting to a GP as soon as possible and get it checked out. The other things it can create are things like bowel problems. So diarrhea or constipation. If your body's having trouble digesting something, it's going to be difficult making its way through the system. So you've really got to keep an eye out for that sort of thing. If you're getting consistent issues with constipation, and you hear this a lot with a lot of autistic kids, I see it a lot come up on my group on Facebook where people are saying, you know, we're dealing with constipation, we're trying Movicol, we're trying this and we're trying that, and it's a constant problem. Well, that's quite possibly an issue related to pica. And it's, you know, it's not necessarily, and this isn't trying to be alarmist, but if you're seeing these things, always best to get a GP to check it out. Go to your doctor, see what they say, get them to do some tests and checking on things. But it could be that they're just eating something that's indigestible, and getting it out is a real issue. Likewise, diarrhea. If your body's trying to flush your system, if it's identifying a poison or something that's unhelpful, it's going to try and flush the system, and that's why diarrhea occurs. It's your body flushing the system out, trying to get rid of the bugs and the nasty things that are inside us. When we eat something dodgy at a restaurant, if we go to our favourite Chinese and they've used a bad meat or something like that, we know it goes through our system, and it's like, my friend Adam Pearson would describe it. It's like an explosion at a petit falou factory. It's just awful stuff, and do not do it. So that's what the body's doing. It's flushing this stuff through the system so that your body is safe, and it's part of the immune process. So if you're seeing either constipation or diarrhea, make sure, again, you're heading to your GP, get it checked out. Especially with our kids, because they won't be able to identify these things as readily. Now, as I say, when it comes to pica, all kids go through it at some point. Every person goes through that point where they're testing things, and you're learning your senses and you're learning your body, and you put things in your mouth. I remember my little brother back in Australia came in with 3 slugs on his tongue. It was just the most gross thing I've ever seen. It's entirely common, and it's entirely typical, and it's exactly what happens, and it's part of that process. The problem is the compulsive side, and we've just discussed a list of the sort of symptoms that can affect. The real problem is with pica is that it's compulsive, as I say. So because it's compulsive, it doesn't stop. So even though a person is getting all those feedbacks from their brain and their body saying do not touch, the compulsion kicks in, and it's a need. So they're continually doing it, and it needs to be addressed, because what happens is over time, these things like, you know, eating rocks, eating gravel, if they're being eaten consistently, then they're going to cause damage internally over time. Which is why looking out for things like blood in stool is such an important part of it. But it really comes back to that repetitiveness. The compulsion to continue doing it leads to far more issues, because it's causing ongoing damage, and that can be really dangerous. Another example is if there's lead in paint. If you've got an old paint on the wall and kids are picking off the chips and putting them in their mouths, lead poisoning is a real possibility. But even things like soil, you don't know what treatments have been put in there. Sometimes if you're out somewhere, you don't know what's been used to treat that, and there could be chemicals, there can be poisons, anything that's getting into that system, and over time, with repeatedness, it's going to cause real issues. So pica is a really important thing to watch out for. As I say, what I don't want to do is cause panic and, everyone's suddenly thinking, oh, my kid's got pica because this is happening. That's not the way it works. It's looking for that compulsiveness. But if you're concerned, see a GP. The worst they're going to say is it's okay, it's part of childhood. Otherwise, they're going to identify things. Which really brings us on to, how is pica diagnosed? Well, GPs in general will look at the symptoms that are presenting. So they'll look for physical symptoms. They'll look at the things like constipation, diarrhea, stomach issues, constant digestive issues, and they'll take those into account. And again, the reason this is relevant to this channel is because a lot of autistic kids, a lot of kids with learning disabilities or behavioural issues, Pica can be more common, and it's something that's more commonly identified with the neurodivergence. And so it becomes really important for parents of autistic kids, for parents of neurodivergent kids. We need to keep an eye on these things closer because they do present more frequently, and it can be an indicator that something big is going on. So if your kid's autistic, make sure that your doctor's aware of that. If your kid's neurodivergent, make sure they're aware, because if those things are in place, it's far more common for Pica to be an issue within it, and so they will take it more seriously and push forward. The time frame they usually look for is at least a month. So if it's been going on for over a month, then that's really a time to get to the doctor, get to the GP, see what they say, get them checked out. Again, it's all coming back to just making sure our kids are at their healthiest. And these things are really important. Another option they may take is they may do blood tests, and they may just take x-rays just to see what's going on inside the body. So all these things contribute to the diagnosis process. So the treatment is a big part of this. So Pica is treatable in different ways. Obviously, the first treatment any doctor is going to look at is the immediate. So if there's any damage being done, how can that be treated? So they'll look for things like ulcers, intestinal tears, any kind of damage internally that consuming these items is causing. And they'll obviously make recommendations and sort that out from there. From then on, it's really identifying whether it's Pica, and as a result of the Pica, what they can do. And really, there's no cure. And I mean, like with so many things that, this is something that really isn't like autism doesn't need a cure, because it doesn't. But Pica obviously can present some real issues, and there isn't really a cure for it. There's nothing they can do from that perspective. What it is really about educating yourself how to keep the environment safe at home, how to keep the environment safe where they are, but also educating yourself, learning the sort of tricks and the strategies that will help to manage Pica in the house, and how to really manage that in a much more effective way. And it can come back to, sometimes it comes down to parental training and stuff like that. It can also come back to therapies and to mental health services that can really step in and start helping with this stuff. There is support out there, and it is something, as I say, it tends to be that as kids grow up, it wears off in a way. Probably the compulsion's always there, but the likelihood is that they're learning strategies that they realise, I don't like feeling this way, and therefore I know I shouldn't eat that. Regardless of the compulsion, the brain takes over in that sort of situation. Again, it comes back to what we discussed so many times with neurodivergence and especially with autism, that the brain is just working a different way. So the communication between the brain and the body are different, and they may not work in the typical way that ours would. So for myself as neurotypical, if I eat something bad, I feel ill, and I won't eat that again. And it's why, so many people, when they've had a really big night out drinking and they feel really ill, they'll go off that form of alcohol at least for a period, because the body's identifying it. It's just part of that system that says, that's not good, and that caused me stress and pain, and I don't want to go back there again. So that's what's really taking place. So really the therapies click into that. They really help support that and help the child understand what they're experiencing, how they're experiencing, why they're experiencing it, and what they can do to prevent experiencing it in future. But it really does come back to, it's one of those things that sadly comes back to a real sense of constant parental management. And it's something that would, if you're experiencing it, you have to keep a big eye out and make sure that if your kids are experiencing it, you're treating it and you're getting it sorted. So can Pica be prevented? Is it something that we can stop occurring? Unfortunately, the answer is no. As I say, all kids go through a form of Pica at some stage, in that they will be testing their boundaries and they'll be testing their systems. And that's part of the sensory development, sticking things in your mouth, chewing things, eating things you probably shouldn't. And to a different degree, a lot of us have Pica in different ways. If you chew your nails, really, it's sort of a form of Pica. It's, you're really chewing something that's not supposed to be eaten. And it can happen with lots of things. As I say, pregnant women experience Pica in periods because they need to top up things that are lacking in their body through the development of the child inside them. So that's a natural thing. But we tend to find healthier ways, or at least not unhealthy ways to find that. So it can be eating unusual food or food combinations. It affects the taste and stuff like that. So that really kicks in. However, when it comes to our kids, it's not that situation. So when you've got a kid who's experiencing Pica, it's just going to happen, and it's something that it really is looking out for that compulsiveness. So if you're seeing it as a repetitive thing and it's happening over an extended period of time with the same things, so it's like, like kids will for years go through putting different things in their mouths and testing it. However, if they're doing the same thing and it's causing the problem, so gravel's probably a good example. I know of many Pica kids who have consume the gravel, and it's like it's a constant thing, and it can damage the teeth, it can damage their their internal organs and stuff like that as it's going through our system. So it's really key that we identify if something's happening regularly over a period. That's when we really need to check it out. But there's nothing we can do to prevent it. It's not something that you can be a better parent at and then avoid it. It's not something that you can identify, but it really is something that affects autistic and neurodivergent kids and kids with learning difficulties and learning disabilities much more seriously. So it's something that can be much more, again, that compulsiveness to Pica is what kicks in. So it's something to really, really watch out for. If you see the signs, as I say, go to your GP and get it checked. The worst they can say is it's okay at the moment, but if you're still seeing it, go back, be persistent, and make sure that it's being addressed. So that's it. It's really just a basic overview of Pica and what you need to look out for and what can be done about it and how it works. Over the time, I'm going to be reaching out. I want to get some experts on Pica to come in, and we'll have some interviews and we can talk about Pica on a much deeper level. So keep an eye out for that, and you can do that by hitting like, hitting subscribe, ringing the bell, and you always know when there's new content like that coming up. Please do go check out my merch store. There is loads of stuff in there, and every penny that's made from the merchandise sales goes directly to the PDA Society. It's linked through their bank, so it just goes straight in there. It doesn't come through me at all. It is a great way to raise money for a great cause, and you can look good doing so. I will see you again on the next episode. In the meantime, please do stay safe.